But we are at 5:32, and I have the same announcement that I had last time. It's going to be the same announcement I have going forward. I might add a little bit to it, but it is schedule your demos. We have 2.5 weeks until the next drop date. Reach out to TAs, look at office hours if you think you need help, plan ahead. And yeah, let's really focus on getting those graded assignments turned in. I don't think there's anything else other than what Carrie will share in her slides. And yeah, we have 2 catch-up days remaining. No mustard days, just the 2 catch-up days. So with that bad joke, I will just pass it over to Carrie. And TAs, I'm going to go ahead and open up my own room soon. So we'll get going with the TA Group 1 meeting. All right, y'all, have a good night.
Thanks, Colin. Okay. Let's go ahead and start digging here into, let me get this back where I need it to be. Let's start talking about the modern JavaScript landscape. So there is so much more to JavaScript than we have already taught you. And tonight you're going to learn some of the ways that we do things professionally these days that have a lot of things about the syntax they've improved. So you're going to learn some of that tonight. And then for Studio, there is no actual Studio exercise associated with this chapter. So you'll just have time to, work with each other on non-graded assignment things if you'd like, work on your graded assignments, demo your graded assignments with either your TAs or one of the floater TAs. So make good use of this time tonight. All right, so the last 2 graded assignment deadlines are Thursday, the 3rd, which is a week from tonight for the graded assignment 5, and graded assignment 6 is due on the 14th. That's when everything is due that night. That night is a catch-up class, but you have to have things completed and your TAs have to have that grade in by midnight. So be kind to your TAs, try to do things ahead as much as possible. Okay, I do have the video up for the intro to graded assignment 5. If any of you haven't seen that and want to dig into that, hopefully will help you kind of navigate the code. There's a lot going on, so I explain all of that. There is another meetup for the folks in Kansas City on Saturday from 4 to 6. And Philly and St. Louis are to be announced at this point. All right, let's talk about the modern JavaScript landscape. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the terms vanilla JS and ES6 and what that means. I want to introduce, some of these are not actually in the chapter, but I'm going to teach you about them anyway, because I think they're good for you to know now. So I'm going to talk about the ternary operator, the spread operator, deconstruction, the for of loop, arrow functions, how to map over an array with a higher order array function or method. We'll talk about extending JS, a superset of JS, and transpiling to JavaScript. So let's get going. So vanilla JS is not really like a special framework or anything. It just means it's JavaScript that's used without any sort of libraries or frameworks. When you just use JavaScript, you're using vanilla JS. And I clicked on something I didn't mean to. Wow, okay. So ECMA script, also called ES6, was in 2015 that kind of came out, and they had major updates to the language for the first time in forever. So lots of new changes. You have already used some of this by using the keywords let and const, but by the fact that classes exist in JavaScript, they didn't used to. There's a lot of things that you've actually, wow, how does that keep happening? It's like there's something in here that I can't see. That's really strange. Oh, yep, there it is. That's interesting. I can click on it even though you couldn't see it yet. Okay, so there's more at W3 Schools if you want to learn more about all of the ins and outs of that. Libraries like React, which we will be learning in the next 3 classes, use this more modern syntax very heavily, which is why it's important to learn about it tonight. So we're going to go through a bunch of that, and you will be much better prepared for React. So the ternary operator, this is a single line bit of logic, kind of replaces an if-else set of blocks. It uses this combination of a question mark and a colon. And you can see here that, this example, I've got a Boolean value saved in loading. And so I'm just asking, I have text that I want to assign to this variable. So I say, let page text equal. And then I ask a question, is loading true? And if it is, then the first thing is what will be set as the value for page text. Otherwise, if it's false, whatever comes after the colon is what gets set as the value. Value if true, value if false. So the same one here. Let's say that, and maybe we're fetching this from an API. Maybe we have a bunch of, or a banking institution, and we have a bunch of information about our user, and we're looking at their accounts, and we get that value back for their account balance, and it's actually in the negative. We might want to change the text color. And so we could say, let's evaluate whether or not the account balance is, below 0 or not. So if it is greater than or equal to 0, we'll leave the text green. But if it's less than 0, let's change that text to red and make it really stand out. So you can see how great this operator is, because it makes it really simple to assign values based on logic in a single line without having to have several lines of text with if else. So we can go over and do an example of this. All right, so we are going to talk about ternary operators. Let's see. So I've got this, we're going to go Strange New Worlds themed tonight, guys. So I've got Pike in chair is true. So if Pike is in the captain's chair, then he's in command. Otherwise, we're going to assume that Spock is in command. And I've got a phrase, and I want to set the value of the phrase. So I could do an if else block and say, if Pike is in the chair, then set phrase equal to hit it. Otherwise, else set phrase equal to, I would like the ship to go now. Super awkward, but we love him. Okay, so we want to write an equivalent expression just using a ternary operator here. So I can say, let phrase 2, I'm gonna have to give it a new name since phrase already exists. And I'll just ask the question, is Pike in the chair? That's already a Boolean. That's all I have to do. And then I can just, assign that value to either this value or with the colon, this value, and then finish my line of code there. So now we can print this phrase. Oops, 2. And see what it says. So I'm going to come down here and say node modern JS examples.js. And there we have it, hit it. So, it evaluated, because this was true, it evaluated to the first one. Now, if I come up here and I change it to false, so that Spock is in command, and I run it again, now it says, I would like the ship to go now. So that's the ternary operator. Super simple. Okay, the spread operator is very useful. You can use it, it's a set, 3 dots, it's an ellipse essentially. This can be used with the name of an array to extract its elements. And then you can do things with those elements once they're no longer, inside that array. For example, making a true copy of an array, or combining some arrays, or providing arguments for things like math.min and math.max, which they don't accept arrays. They just want the numbers that are inside the arrays. So here's an example here of where I've got array 1 has 3 numbers in it. And I say, okay, let array 2 equal array 1. Well, if you guys remember this from when we talked about this earlier in the unit, array 2 is not a true copy of array 1 if we do this, because it's just pointing to it. It's just an alias saying, I know exactly where that is in memory, and I'm going to point right to that spot. But if we want to make a true copy to where they actually do exist in 2 different places in memory, and then you could manipulate one without changing the other, then you would want to use, this is one way you can do this, and it's great because it's super simple. You just create the array, and then just say ... array 1, and that goes and grabs all of the elements from array 1 and places them in a new array that is now stored in array 3. So if you try this console log and say, let's test and see if these are loosely equal, it's going to say true when it's array 1 and array 2 because they're the same thing in memory. It's just an alias, but it will definitely say false when you do it with a spread operator because they are two completely different places in memory. And here we've got, an example of using math.max where, I'm just taking all the numbers out of the array and giving them to that method. And then of course it finds that the, maximum number is 8. So we can do a little bit of this here. Let me get out of here. Spread operator. Okay, so I have 3 crews. I've got Captain Pike #1 and Spock in the first array, Uhura, La'an, Ortegas, Hemmer, and Kyle in the second array, and Dr. Mbanga and Nurse Chapel in the third array. So we're going to use the spread array operator to combine them all into a single array. So this is something else you can do with this. I'm just going to say let enterprise crew equal, and then I'm going to create an array and say ... crew 1, oops, ... crew 2, and ... crew 3. And now I can come down here and print it, and we should see an array that is, there we go, that is all of them in a single array. There we go. So all 10 of them right there in a single array because I just used that spread operator to extract all of the elements and put them all together. Okay. Let's talk about deconstruction, and then I will stop and take some questions. So deconstruction is this idea that you can take an array object and create variables for very specific elements inside the array. For example, we'll talk about arrays now, and I'll talk about objects in a second. So if you want to be able to identify certain ones that you can continue to use with named variables, we can do this. So for an array, you would use the keyword let or const first. And then on the right side of the assignment operator over here, you want to name the array that's actually holding the elements you want to refer to. And then back on the left side, after the let or the const, you would assign variable names inside those brackets that correspond to each element. So in this example, I actually have the keyword let here. And then I've gone and said, I want to access username, and that's where I want to, get these values from. So I've set that over here on the right side. And then in the left side, inside the brackets, I've given new variable names, first name and last name, to represent the contents inside of it. And now I can use those. So down here, I've said console log hello first name. And of course, that's going to say, hello, Bob, right? So that's arrays. And then if we talk about objects, you've actually already done this before. If you practiced this when we were talking about importing and exporting modules in JavaScript, because I showed you that this was one of the alternate syntaxes. So we can, let's see, let me get this going. For an object, you want to, again, use the keyword let or const before you, to kind of declare that you're setting this up for these new variable names. And then, of course, name the object that has the key value pairs you want to access. And then inside curly braces, you will use the key names on the left side. And you actually can have new variable names that aren't the same as the keys as long as you use a colon to assign them. The thing that's a little counterintuitive about this is that you actually do the original key first and the new name second, rather than the other way around. So it seems counterintuitive to me. Maybe it doesn't to you, but it does to me. So here again, this time I've gone for const, and we've got keywords. And there's the object that I want to access. So I'm setting that on the right side of the assignment operator here. And then on the left side, I've got all these variables that I'm creating, city and state, which correspond directly to keys in here. So that's all I need to do. But if I wanted to do zip, and by the way, I could have done this all in one line, but there's no room on the slide. So I did it on 2 lines. But I decided I wanted to call it zip instead of zip code. So I name what the original key is, and then I say, but I want to call it zip. And so then after that, I can log each of those, or do whatever I want to with them, really. But just for the sake of example, I've logged them here. And of course, for city, you would see New York, and then 55555 for the zip. So that's the basic syntax for this. Let's do a little bit of practice. Let's see, where are we? Deconstruction. Here we go. Okay, so for arrays, we already have this crew 3 up here that has the doctors in it, right? Yeah, Dr. Mbanga, Nurse Chapel. So we're going to create variables doctor and nurse to represent each of them so that we can access those values separately from now on. So I will start with let and give my brackets and say doctor and nurse, and then just set it equal to crew 3. That's where I'm getting these from. And now I can console log doctor, and I can console log nurse. And we can come down here and run that. And we see Dr. Mbanga and Nurse Chapel. So now, each of these new variable names hold those values that I pulled from this array. That's deconstruction. Okay, let's do it again. And this time I'm going to show you an extra little thing, because you might say, what if you don't want them all? Because arrays are ordered sequentially, right? You have to kind of do things in order. It doesn't know which element you're referring to. So there's a way to do this. So let's say we come to crew 1, which has Captain Pike, number 1, and Spock. And we don't really need a variable for number 1. We only need variables for Captain Pike and Spock. We can do this. So what I would do in this case, let me back up here, there we go. I would say let brackets and then say Captain. And then I'm going to skip over number 1 by just putting another comma like that. And then I can say science officer. And that way JavaScript knows, just skip one of the elements and go to the next one. And then I would just say crew 1. And then I can console log captain, and console log science officer. And we can show that those are indeed storing those values from the array. And it did skip over number 1 because I just put that extra comma in there. Okay, last one, and then I'll take questions. Deconstructing objects. So I've got, enterprise with ship name, enterprise, registry number, NCC 1701, class constitution. And so we're going to create variables ship name and registry from the enterprise, and then we're going to print each. So again, this time I can do const if I want. So I'll just do that const. And then I tend to prefer const for sort of thing so that they can't be overwritten later accidentally. And then here, I said I wanted a registry. The original key is actually registry number. So I need to say registry number : registry. And that way it'll assign the variable name from that key. And then I set it equal to enterprise. And now I can console log ship name and console log registry. And we'll see what we get. And there we go, enterprise and NCC-1701. Okay, who has questions about anything I talked about so far? Madeline, I see your hand is up.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm always curious why you would use a certain method over the first. So over another one, sorry, for the spread operator, why would you use that over like concatenation? Is there like relative benefits to it besides it being like simpler syntactically?
It's just cleaner and easier to read.
Yeah, that's a huge benefit.
Yeah, it is. It is. Yeah, it's because you're setting, one array that is clearly an array. So if somebody looks at it and goes, oh, hey, yeah, that's an array, rather than obscuring it by using a bunch of methods that then result in an array.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Chad? Chad? No?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Okay. So the deconstruction stuff, can you use that to, when you're like fetching data, to make variables from the data?
Yes. Yes, you can. It's super handy.
Okay, that's what I figured.
Yeah. Hamid?
Yes, I was a little confused about deconstructing the object. So like, how did you like just ship name, but then for registry number, you had to use, like you had to type it out and then put the colon registry.
Yeah, okay, so essentially what the rule is that if you want your variable name that's available out here to be the same as the actual key, then there's no reason for you to say ship name.
Okay.
Because otherwise that's what you would have to do. But as long as they're exactly the same, you can leave this part off and just say, I want the variable name to be the same as the key.
Okay, I got it. Thank you.
Yeah. Sneha?
So we can just access it the old way, right? So what is the benefit of using deconstructing? Like, can you give us some real life example for
You are going to get real life examples when we do React.
Okay.
There are certain things, especially when we do part 3 of React, when we talk about state, there are certain React hooks like use state where you have to deconstruct in order to access the things that it returns.
I see. Okay.
Yeah. So, so we'll have time to really get into it, and I'll definitely be able to kind of point out this is where we're using deconstruction.
Mhm.
And definitely
you.
for imports, like I always, everyone pretty much uses deconstruction for imports when you have multiple things you're importing from a file. So you'll see that a lot too. Okay, last one, Tyler.
When you renamed registry number to registry, does that permanently change the key in the enterprise object?
Nope.
Okay.
All it does is create a variable that refers to that key.
Okay,
And
so if you would print enterprise again, it would still say registry number.
yes, and in fact, it also does not mean that, like, let me show you something else. So let's say now I say I want to change the value of enterprise dot registry number to be, something else. And now I go and I say console log registry. Let's do that. Okay, you'll see that it still holds the original value because it only takes the value at the time that I assigned it, and it grabs it then and only then. It's not like an alias. It doesn't point back.
Okay.
Okay, so that's something to keep in mind. Now with the React hooks, it's going to actually run something that is going to then produce new results each time by the nature of what it is. But for something like this, where it was just a static object, you'd have to actually like write extra code to make that happen. But as it stands, it stores it once now that we've got that value. But if we go and we change the original object now, registry still has the original value.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so let's move forward. We still have plenty to talk about. So there's this thing called a for of loop. You're familiar with for loops. You're familiar with the for in loop that is used with regular JavaScript objects. But there's something called a for of loop that was created more recently that will allow you to iterate both through simple arrays of just simple elements. And it also will let you iterate through something that's an object of the map class, which is a special kind of object. So we're going to do these one at a time. First, let's talk about using it with a regular array. You can use these keywords for and of to iterate through an array. Every element's accessed once in order. And you just use the let keyword to name your local variable. Now, this probably sounds familiar because when you do a classic for loop, you're creating a variable as an iterator, for the index that we usually call I, right? And you're telling it to increment, so this basically just assumes that you want to go all the way through the array and that you want to increment one at a time. So this is what this is good for. But it's cleaner syntax than having to do the whole, I equals 0, let the length, get the length of array and all that stuff. So there's no bracket notation needed either because you're not using an index. You're just letting it do its thing. So in this example, I have, I've got this colors array with 3 colors. I've created the keywords for, and then let and of to help define this. And you can see here that I'm using the array colors as the thing that we're iterating through. And then I'm setting the local variable to represent each element one at a time. And then I'm saying, every time you loop through, execute this code. So this looks a lot like the for in loop that you guys are used to working with JavaScript object to go through the key value pairs. But in this case, you're just setting it up to go through a regular array. And then what should come out once you do that is that on separate lines in the console, you see red, blue, and green. So I'm gonna talk about map, and then we'll do some live coding on both of these. Yeah, so there's a class in JavaScript called map. And you can create these special objects of key value pairs from an array of arrays. And there are use cases for this, which I will not get into right now, but I just want you to see it and have some exposure to it. And then later, if it becomes relevant, you can get a little more practice with it. But the cool thing about a map object is that it's more flexible than a regular JavaScript object in some ways. For one thing, keys can be any primitive, not just strings. With a regular JavaScript object, your keys always are strings, but you can actually use, numbers and things as well. And a map object is also ordered. The key value pairs are in a specific order. They're sequential, unlike a regular JavaScript object where they could kind of show up in any order. They're stored by, by key, not by index. So if you use a for of loop and you use it in combination with destructuring, you can actually access both the key and the value separately and go through them sequentially. So here's an example. I've got an array of arrays where alpha has these little combos of a number and a letter for each element. So I'm going to say, take that and turn it into a map, an object of the map class. We'll call it alpha map. And then let's loop through that using the for of loop. So we start by saying, I want to, this is what I want to loop through, that map object. I want to set my local variables for key and value. So I can just use deconstruction like this to say, go in to every element, because we know every element is an array, essentially. That's what it was born out of here. We can say, I want the key to be called number. I want the value to be called letter. And now I have two variables that I've deconstructed that I can use to use them separately. And so now I can just console log something. Letter number is letter, and then with a template literal there. And then what we see as it loops through is that each one prints out letter 1 is A, letter 2 is B, and so on. So this is very, very useful for these types of objects. Let's see. If we come up here to do some for of loop stuff, let's first we'll do a simple array. Let's look at crew 2. So this was our crew up here that has 5 different members of the enterprise crew. And we're going to just print each of those names. That's all we're going to do. So I'm just going to say for, and then let member of crew 2. And then I'll just say console.log member. I mean, it's that simple, right? Much, much cleaner than having to do a traditional for loop and set all of the different instructions and use bracket notation. This is super nice. So we can run this. And we see Hura, Lon, Ortegas, Hemmer, and Kyle. All right, now if we work with the map class objects, I've set up this array of arrays where each of the founding, planets and empires here of the Federation are in these different pairs. And so I'm creating a map from this. And now we want to just, this is interesting. We're going to print it and see what it looks like, first of all. So, because it definitely does not look like a traditional JavaScript object when you see it in the console. Yeah, here you go. So it presents like this. It says this is an object of the map class. It has 5 key value pairs in it. And 1 is the value is, the Earth, 2, the value. So you can see, right away, something that's very different is that we're able to use those numbers as keys, which you can't do with a regular JavaScript object. So it's, very flexible, keeps everything in order. So let's actually loop through those now ourselves and say for, I'm just going to say planet. It's actually, yeah, that's fine. Let me see. I could call it founder. How's that? Well, I need the number anyway. We got to use deconstruction, right? So let's do number, and then I'll just say member. They're members of the Federation. That's fine. And I'm gonna put a little space in there. That's traditional. Okay, and then say of Fed founders map. It's important to remember you're looping through the map object, not through the original array of arrays. And then, although we probably could do that. So I can say console.log and just have like a little simple template literal here that just numbers them as an ordered list like this. And then we can print that. Let's give it a whirl. There we go. So we have a nice ordered list of each one using its using the key and using the value, which we pulled from that single element inside this map, the key value pair. Okay, let's talk about arrow functions. You guys are excited about this, right? Arrow functions scared the heck out of me as a student initially, because I kept seeing all these examples when I would like Google things, like especially like Stack Overflow and stuff, because this is what developers use. They use arrow functions, and I was like, I don't know how to read this, and it was frustrating. So your frustration no longer needs to exist, because you're going to understand this, and then you're not going to be scared of them, and you're going to start using them all the time. I guarantee you. Okay, so new syntax. This operator that's sometimes called a fat arrow. It's made by combining an equal sign and a greater than sign. It replaces the function keyword. That's important. Just remember that. It just replaces the function keyword. And then you put it after the parameters instead of before. If you're storing the function in a variable, it's generally kind of the best practice is to use const to prevent it from being overwritten. But this also means that it now has a very specific scope. So you just need to make sure you declare it above wherever you intend to use it, unless it's in another file and you're importing, in which case it's imported at the top, so you're good. But here's an example. You've got this traditional function, add nums, A and B, and then return A plus B, right? With an arrow function, you're going to switch this around by using this fat arrow here after the parameters, and using const with the name if you give it a name. And then let's see, I'm gonna make sure. Yeah, so here's that function keyword, and there's the fat arrow. That's what's replacing it, and you just move it over on the other side of the parameters. And then your params stay the same. And I'm going to talk more about optional syntax with the params in a second. But that's pretty much it. This would be, we haven't really made a ton of changes. I wanted to kind of do a baby step first, so you can see the first way in which they're different. But let's talk about other ways that you could do it, because it actually can get way simpler and sleeker. So if you want to simplify this even more, there are sometimes certain circumstances under which you can. So if there's only one parameter, you don't even need the parentheses around the parameter. If there are no parameters, you do have to have parentheses to represent that there's nothing there, but it needs to be there. And if you have more than one, you have to have the parentheses. If you only have one line of code in the function body that's to be executed, you can actually omit the brackets, the curly braces, and you can omit the return keyword if you don't have the brackets, which is the thing that got me in trouble last class with that second fetch option, by the way. So let's look at this example. We've got add nums here, and you can see the parameters here, A and B stays the same. This is as simple as I can make this because there's two of them, so they still have to be in parentheses. I've got my arrow, and the first time I had the curly braces and return keyword here, but you can actually take that off and just say, take these parameters and return A plus B, and that's what that means right there. So it's very, very simplified. And then down here, we've got examples of a case where you have a single parameter, so we don't need the parentheses. And I'm just saying, I want to store a value in, no, I want to have this function be stored in this variable, greet user. The function has a parameter first name, and the function should just console log hello first name. That's all it does. So this works whether you have a return value or you don't, because this is one where you don't have a return value. You're just console logging something. The return value is undefined, and that's fine. And the second one here, we actually are returning a value, and we're saying we don't need to take any sort of parameter, any sort of argument. So we don't have to have a parameter, but we do need the parentheses in that case. There has to be something here between the equal sign and the fat arrow. And then we're just saying, when we call this function, get current date, then just return new date and format it as the locale date string so that we get it, real pretty like this. And for today, that would be 7/27/2023. So these are some of the ways that you can really simplify things and make it nice and clean. So let's go over and do a couple of these. It keeps flipping around on me. All right, here we go. So arrow functions, and let me write it down. All right, so I've got this function explore. We give it a planet, and it says, let's go boldly toward whatever the planet name is. So let's rewrite this as an arrow function, and we're going to call it go boldly. So we can just do, let's see. Yeah, so you always use const for this. That's, like I said, you don't have to, but it's considered best practice. And then you want to just say, I have exactly one parameter. I could put it in parentheses, but I don't have to. This is as simple as I can make it. And then I'm going to say, for that parameter, here's what I want you to do. And the only thing to do is to console log. Oh, wow. Okay. The only thing to do is to console log, and I can just copy this entire thing actually. And that finishes it off. And that's the whole function right there. Boom. So let's call it go boldly, and I'm going to give it Nibiru. All right, and we will run it. And there we have, let's go boldly toward Nibiru. Okay, good. Now let's look at this next one. We have another function, make it go. We can give it a speed factor, and we can give it a type, although it's going to default to type impulse. And then we say, if type is warp, then console log warp factor, speed factor. Otherwise, console log speed factor impulse. So we can rewrite this as an arrow function and simplify it considerably. And we're going to kind of actually do this, not only simplifying it by making an arrow function, but also simplifying it using a ternary expression so that we don't have to have the if else in there. So this is going to get a lot smaller real fast. So I will say const hit it. And I'm going to set that equal to, I have two things here. So I need to say speed factor as the first parameter. Type is the second parameter with a default value of impulse. And then I can have my fat arrow, and you might think, okay, but you have multiple lines of code. Don't you need brackets? And yeah, if I had multiple lines of code, I would need a bracket. But guess what? A ternary expression is a single line of code. So I'm not going to need it after all. I can just say console.log, a single console.log instead of two of them. And then I'll just say type equals warp, and then question mark. And then I'll say, that I want this particular template little right there to be what's console logged, if that's true. And this particular one here, if it's false. Okay, and that does wrap around because of the way I've got this set, and it is long, but it's still technically one line. It's on line 120. If you use something to format, you might find that it automatically formats it to kind of do something like this to where it's more readable. And that's part of the linting process usually. And so then it's on more than one line, but it's still considered a single line thing, which Readability is really what's key. So this is actually more important. So, maybe I, would have used the brackets and put it on multiple lines, but it's okay. This totally works. There are lots of different ways to do it. Just kind of want to go for what's most readable usually. All right, so we're going to call it, hit it. And first we're going to give it full and an impulse, but it defaults to impulse. So we can just use the one argument. And then we're going to call it again. And this time we'll give it 8. It actually doesn't need to be a string to work. And we will run both of these. All right. Okay, so there you see we have full impulse and warp factor 8. So, it took in the parameters, it executed this and used that ternary logic to determine which one of these two to console log. And it's, fairly simple. Okay, I'm going to show you another example of an arrow function when we talk about mapping here in just a second. Oh yeah, okay, right. Okay, so we talked about a class called map. This is a completely different use of map. This is actually an array method that's built into JavaScript called map.map that allows you to create a new array from an existing array. It basically just says, for every single element, I'm going to create a map that has a corresponding new element in the new array. And then you just have a function that you give it to say, this is what I want you to do to that element, and then produce the new value for the new array. So this function that you give it needs a parameter to represent the element, a body of code to execute, and then it's just going to loop over and execute it for each one. So here's an example. We've got, nums is 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, and I do have another bullet point. Let me get that on here. Yeah, so the result, once it executes the entire thing, is a new array. That's what's returned from this. That is at the same length, but it has all the new values in it. Okay, so if I have this array nums 1, 2, 3, 4, and I say let squares equal, and then I say nums.map. So I'm calling this is an array method. I'm calling it on the array, nums.map, but then I give it a very simplified arrow function, an anonymous function, and just say, okay, for every single number in the array, I want you to return number squared. And then for this one, for cubes, I do the same thing, but I say for every number in the array, return the number cubed. And so it's going to execute this for every single element as it loops through. That's what map does, it loops. And then it provides the final product. So once that's done, all I have to do is go check the values, and I'll have an array here of 1, 4, 9, 16, and an array here of 1, 8, 27, and 64. So you go straight from one array to a different type of array with a very, very simple line of code. Now you may have more advanced logic that you want to do rather than just like squaring or cubing something, but again, this fits on my slide. So let's look at this again. There's your parameter for this anonymous function, and it doesn't need parentheses because there's just one. And there's that simplified return. You don't have to have the brackets or the return keyword if you can do it on one line. So that whole entire thing right there is an arrow function in between the parentheses there. So let's go practice this. I've got a planet, an array of planets that I'm going to create a new array where all the planet names are capitalized. So I'll say console.log. And sorry, I'm doing things in the wrong step. That's the next step. So here I'm going to say, let, planet caps or something like that. And I'm going to just go to the original array, planets, call map, the method map, and then give it a function. And I'm going to say for each planet in the array, give me planet dot to uppercase. That's all I need. And so the new array should have every element with these exact same things, except for they're capitalized instead. So let's print it to verify that it works. All right, we'll come down here and run it. There we go. We have all 5 planets. They are all capitalized. So in a single line with relative ease, we were able to tell it exactly what we wanted it to do to every single element, and boom, we have a new array. So this, these kind of changes that they made a few years ago really, really changed the game. There's a lot, you can really simplify your logic and what you need to do in a lot of ways. So, practice with this kind of stuff, get comfortable reading it, because you're going to see it in professional code all the time. And we're definitely going to be using things like this with React in the next 3 classes at some point. Okay, who has questions about the things I just talked about? Anyone? Jake?
Yeah, you've been logging through your terminal. Is that something we're going to learn how to do coming up? I don't think we've had to do that yet. Is that something with Node or?
Yeah, your instructions for the exercises for this one was to get Node up and running, and this is exactly what you can do. I think I only demonstrated this for you once before, very quickly. It was when you were learning about the terminal. I think I very quickly ran this for you, but yeah, that's it. You just say Node and the file name, as long as you're in the right directory. So you can always check, present working directory, right, and get where you are. You can also do a list to make sure you're in the directory that has your files. And then you can just do Node and you just choose the file that you want. And I hit tab to auto-complete it. And then I just run it, just hit enter. Yeah, so this is how you can run your JavaScript when you're just working in VS Code like this and you're not in Replit anymore. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Anybody else? Nope. Okay. All right, we are going to take a 5-minute break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about a few more things that will help you kind of understand where we're headed with all this fancy JavaScript as we go into React. I will see you in a few. Okay, welcome back. Let's talk a little bit about JS extension, this idea that you can extend the syntax of JavaScript with additional syntax. So, maybe there's some syntax that you want to be able to use. It's not part of a regular JavaScript syntax. There are these extensions, and one of the most popular ones, particularly important for using with React, is JSX. So you're going to get comfortable with this in the next couple of classes for sure. But this makes it easy to write HTML and JavaScript together because it allows for syntax that can be, easily displayed. Because you remember in the DOM, if you wanted to add a bunch of HTML to the DOM using JavaScript, you pretty much just have to put it in a big template literal, and then it's just a big wall of text, and it's not really, it doesn't format nicely, easily in the IDE and things like that. So JSX is fantastic because you can really work with it easily, and you can combine it nice and cleanly without having to put things inside template literals. So the placeholder that's used for JSX is just fancy braces without no $sign. And anything inside that is, JavaScript expressions that can be evaluated, off the bat. So they're generally not going to be, too crazy. You can't put like entire declarations of things or mechanisms like loops and if else blocks. So generally you would like assign those to a variable ahead of time and then just use that inside the placeholder to evaluate it. So let's see, we're going to talk more about all of this in the next class when we do it in the context of React. But for now, I do have this example, and I can actually pull it up over here. So this is a file that, you can see the commenting syntax is a little bit different. You literally put your JavaScript comment inside a placeholder like this. But let's say I've got this title, and this is just regular JavaScript. I've got this string, and I want to actually place it on the page as a header. I can directly assign the HTML to a variable and then just use the placeholder to grab the title, and then I can evaluate it with 2 uppercase right here in the placeholder. So that kind of thing, very common. And you'll get, like I said, you're going to get comfortable with this. And that's really all I need to say about this because it's a lot easier to teach it more thoroughly when we're doing it in the context of using it with React. So next class, we'll really get more into it. Okay, the next topic is supersets. So you can have a completely different language that's compatible with JavaScript, and that would be called a superset because it's still valid. And TypeScript in particular is very popular because it requires type declarations. You remember in JavaScript, you don't type your data at all during the and then while it's being compiled, JavaScript just does its best to infer what the type is from the way you've written your code. And then when it executes it, hopefully you don't have any type errors come down the pipe later on, but you don't know until you actually run the program and until certain routines are run and things. So TypeScript says, I can fix that. And it gives you some extra syntax that allows you to give types explicitly to each variable when you declare it, and then it will catch you before it even executes. It stops compiling with errors if you actually try to use something with a type that it isn't already assigned for. So it prevents errors big time. TypeScript has been used exclusively with Angular since version 2. If you see things out there in the wild, you'll see a lot of people refer to AngularJS, and sometimes they know what they're talking about, and sometimes they don't. Because AngularJS was version 1 many, many years ago. And then in version 2, they said, we're not going to use JavaScript anymore. We're going to use TypeScript. And ever since then, they've used TypeScript. So really, it's just Angular. If you see Angular, that's anything since version 2. It is sometimes used with React. I also have used it at my last job. I used it with Svelte, which is a super lightweight thing, even more lightweight than React is, but operates similarly. So, you very well may use this if you are working with some of these technologies for sure. Okay, I'm going to get into TypeScript just a little bit. I have like a whole lecture on this, guys, because this used to be class 17. If you ever want to watch the entire lecture, you can go back to my previous cohort and look up those videos. But let's get into here. Yeah, so declaring a TypeScript variable. It's just like JavaScript in most ways. You use let or const. And then before the equal sign, you actually add a colon and give it the type. And then you can see here, I've got a score that I'm typing as number, colon number, and then equals 0. So you make the initialization after the typing. So const greeting, I assign it as type string, and then I set the value to hello. Is ready, I set that, this is a Boolean, and I'm setting it to false. And if you want to do something like an array, the syntax is a little bit different. So you're going to, for one thing, in TypeScript, elements have to be the same type. There is a way for you to combine different types with something called a tuple that I think the book mentions. But arrays have to be the same type. So just make sure you add a colon with the type, but then you also give it brackets on the type, and that says this is an array of numbers, or this is an array of strings. So you can kind of see how that's done here. And then you can assign it the value with the actual array itself. But that's how an array is done. Let's go over and, no, I'll talk about this first, and then we'll go over the code. Okay, when you want to run your TypeScript code locally, you can use tsc filename.ts. And then you just do that in the same folder where that file is. And then once you've done that, it creates a JavaScript file. So this is the transpiling we were talking about, or we're going to be talking about. I haven't talked about it yet. But it basically just compiles the TypeScript as JavaScript. And then you can run it just like I talked about earlier with Node. And you run the actual JavaScript compiled file that was made from the TypeScript. But of course, then if you make changes to your TypeScript code, you need to recompile it into JavaScript again before you run the JavaScript file, so that it's, you know, the newest version of it. So let's go over and take a look at this. I have an example here where I've created, Captain Pike is a string, Captain Pike. Years until disaster is number and 10. On duty is a Boolean, and it's true. And then I've created an array called interests. It's an array of strings. So I've given it this type. And then I've actually initialized it to an array with cooking and horseback riding, which are both strings. So we have no problems. I'm console logging each one of them. For this one, I'm using another one of these higher order array methods. Unlike map, for each doesn't create a new array, it just loops through all the elements. So it's a very simple way to do a basic for loop. It's even smaller than doing a for of loop. So if you ever want to just do that, for each is real handy. But I just say, okay, go to the array for each one, take a look at each element. I'm going to call it interest and just console log it. That's all this is doing. So what I need to do now is transpile this TypeScript file into a JavaScript file, and then we'll be able to actually run it with Node. So I'm going to come down here and say tsc tsexample.ts. And now you can see it up here. I just have a new file now, tsexample.js. So it gives it the same name, but it's a JavaScript file. And now I can say node tsexample.js. And there we go, Captain Pike, 10 true, and then cooking and horseback riding are on separate lines because I gave it this little anonymous function to loop through and do them one at a time. Okay, so that's just a little bit of TypeScript for you. And like I said, if you want to know more and have, you can always go to while it's currently available, the current textbook has chapter 17 on TypeScript, and I do have a lecture on that from my previous cohort. Okay, last topic, and then we're done. Transpilation. So when you transpile other code to JavaScript, it's really just you're compiling from one language to another. And TypeScript is transpiled to JavaScript before it's run, as you just witnessed me doing. And then there's this tool called Babel that is used with React that not only manages the version compatibility with ECMA script between different browsers and browser types and browser versions. It also processes that JSX that you're going to be writing that has both the HTML and the JavaScript in it. And it makes sure the pages render properly by creating a JavaScript file that's compiled that will work exactly for that browser and give you the same result every time, no matter who's viewing it where, on what device. So this is a really, really great tool. It's automatically built in. You don't have to do anything special. But that's what it's doing. It's transpiling everything into JavaScript from the JSX. So again, you will learn more about this in the next class when we actually do it. Anybody have any questions? Gabriel.
I guess I'm curious about how objects work in TypeScript. Do you have to do something special too?
Yes. So there's a couple different ways to handle it. One is that you create a custom type and you create the type with the same structure, but the syntax is a little bit different, but you basically say, here's all the keys and here's all their types, and you type each key individually, and then you can apply that custom type to the object. So you just make it structured the same way. It's a very common way to do it. You can also use interfaces. You're going to learn more about what interfaces are when we do Java, and it's very similar. Tyler?
Thank you.
Just to be clear, you could use TypeScript to overwrite the type, like string and like you can make number strings and so forth backwards. Does that make sense?
Because it sets the type before execution, once you set it, you set it. And if you try to change it to anything else, it's going to give you an error. Maybe I'm not understanding your question.
Like say you had an array of numbers, but you can say you can call that an array of strings, right?
No.
No, okay.
So let's take a look at this. So I've got this thing. Let's say that I were to call this, an array of numbers here. VS Code immediately says you can't do that because these are strings and those are numbers. Conversely, if I was to say this is a string, an array of strings, and I was to try to make these into numbers, it's going to do the same thing and say, type number is not assignable to type string. So it gives you that error before you even try to run it. That's because VS Code has that built in to check for that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Tessa. I can't hear you. Can you, are you muted? I think you're muted. Nope.
How about now?
Yep, got you now.
Okay, these are probably out. So this is going back to arrow functions. In the textbook, it said we shouldn't be using them for class constructors or class methods. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, if you were defining a class and you're defining that constructor, which is a function, and you're defining methods, which are functions within the class definition, you don't want to use arrow syntax for those definitions. That's all it means. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yep. Okay, so it looks like there's any more questions. So you can get more practice with a lot of this advanced JavaScript. I have two things that I created a while back, really just as career prep because it isn't something we've ever taught before in this unit. But you can actually filter on topic by advanced JavaScript and you'll get both of these. The first one really goes through, some of the initial things that I was teaching you about. Oh gosh, all right, you know what? Go back. Let me actually go here because I can't remember how it's broken down and I want to look. Aha, okay. So if I wish to go to this starter code, I won't tell you which one's which. Yeah, primitive types versus reference types. rest operator and destructuring. So a lot of, yeah, a lot of those things are in here. And then the other one is the one that gets into all of those higher order functions like map, for each. I go through filter, reduce. These are ones that people use on a regular basis. So if you want some practice with all of those, you can get into these. All right. So we have a catch-up class on Monday, no lecture. I do believe, oh no, wait. Yeah, we were gonna have the company team come in, but now they're not coming until the beginning of unit 2. So you have that entire class for catch-up, graded assignments, demos, whatever you need to use it for, where you have access to all the TAs during that time. The next 3 classes after that are the final 3 classes of unit 1, each about React, and they will correspond to the chapters that are in this new textbook here, React Part 1, 2, and 3. And apologies, I'm getting, okay. And then graded assignment 5, of course, is listed as due on here. So definitely get that done as soon as you can, so that you can just concentrate on the last assignment after that. And then after, this should say class 20, by the way, sorry, I'll fix that later. After class 20 is the last catch-up class on the 14th, and that's the day that everything is due in order for you to be able to continue on to unit 2. All right, so your studio tonight, no exercise, use the time for catch-up, work on your graded assignments, demo graded assignments. Like I said earlier, if your own TAs are not available, see if you can do it with a floater TA instead. That's what they're there for. But you guys go and have a good time working on all this stuff. And I will see you in 1 week for React Part 1.